What would you do if your dream house wanted you gone? This is the haunting story of Lena and the house that whispered her name. This house stood untouched for decades. Empty. Forgotten. The locals had their theories, their superstitions, but few dared to linger. That is until Lena arrived. She saw charm where others saw shadows, hope where others felt fear. But what she discovered inside would chill this small town to its core. Lena was a young woman searching for a new beginning. Life had been unkind, and she longed for a fresh start, a place to call her own, a refuge where she could find peace and rebuild. When she came across the Victorian mansion on the edge of town, it felt like fate. The house stood tall and proud despite its age. The peeling paint, ivy-covered walls, and intricate stained glass windows hinted at the beauty it once held. To Lena, it was perfect, a home with history and character, waiting to be loved again. But some homes hold more than just memories. Some homes carry stories that refuse to stay silent. What started as a dream quickly turned into a nightmare Lena could never escape. Lena moved in on a quiet autumn afternoon. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, she couldn't help but smile. This was it, the start of something new. The house, despite its years of neglect, held a charm she couldn't quite explain. The floors creaked under her feet, not in a way that felt unstable, but as though they were greeting her presence. A faint draft moved through the hallways, carrying with it the scent of aged wood and forgotten time. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, scattering soft, colorful patterns across the dust-laden floors. It was imperfect but beautiful, exactly what Lena had hoped for. But there had been a warning, one she had brushed off as a small-town superstition. The realtor, a man with tired eyes, had hesitated before handing her the keys. "This house has seen things," he had said, his voice low and measured. "Heard things, too. It's not for everyone." Lena had laughed politely at the time, dismissing his words as a harmless attempt to add mystery to the old property. Yet, as she unpacked her belongings, small things began to feel off. The faint hum in the walls was constant, like a vibration she couldn't quite place. Certain rooms felt colder than others, the air heavier, as though someone or something was standing just out of sight. Lena tried to ignore these feelings, chalking them up to the quirks of an old house. But deep down, she couldn't shake the sense that the house was more than it seemed. It didn't take long for strange things to begin. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable. Late at night, as Lena lay in bed, she thought she heard whispers. They were faint, almost like the wind sneaking through the cracks of the old house. But as the nights went on, the whispers grew clearer. And then one night, she swore she heard her name. "Lena." The voice murmured, soft but unmistakable. She sat upright in bed, her heart racing, straining to hear more. But the house was silent, as though nothing had happened. By day it was small things. A chair she knew she had pushed under the table now sat slightly askew. A door she was certain she had closed stood open, creaking softly on its hinges. Lena told herself it was her imagination, or the natural quirks of an old house settling after years of vacancy. But what would you do if you started hearing your name in an empty house? Would you brush it off as easily as Lena did? Or would you wonder who or what was calling for you? The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more distinct, and harder to ignore. One evening, as Lena sat on her worn sofa, she heard it clearly for the first time, a voice soft and desperate, pleading from somewhere deep within the house. "Help us," it said, barely more than a breath. Lena froze, her pulse quickening. She stared at the empty room around her, the dim light of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. She wanted to believe it was her mind playing tricks, but deep down she knew it wasn't. Then the house itself seemed to come alive. The windows rattled violently. though the night outside was calm and still. The lights flickered erratically, plunging the house into moments of darkness that felt longer than they were. The air grew colder, the once welcoming drafts now sharp and biting. In her unease, Lena decided to explore the house more thoroughly, room by room. She searched for anything that could explain the strange occurrences. It was during this search that she discovered the basement door. It was tucked away at the end of a narrow hallway, almost hidden. The brass doorknob was cold to the touch, and as she stood before it, an inexplicable chill ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something waited on the other side, something that wanted her to find it. But she hesitated. The whispers returned, faint but insistent, as though urging her to open the door. That night, she couldn't sleep. The thought of the basement lingered, gnawing at her mind. It felt as though the house itself was calling her, pulling her back to that door, back to the darkness that waited below. After a restless night, Lena could no longer ignore the pull of the basement door. With trembling hands, she grasped the cold brass knob and twisted it open. A rush of stale, icy air met her as she stared into the darkness below. Each step down the narrow, creaking staircase felt heavier than the last. The faint hum she had heard before now grew louder, transforming into a chorus of whispers that echoed off the stone walls. "Help us! Free us!" the voices pleaded, their desperation cutting through the cold silence. At the bottom of the stairs, Lena found herself in a damp, dimly lit basement. The walls were uneven stone, slick with moisture, and the air was thick, making it hard to breathe. But it was the object in the far corner that held her gaze, a large wooden chest, ancient and covered in strange, intricate carvings that seemed to pulse in the faint light. She approached it slowly, the whispers growing louder with each step. Her fingers hovered over the chest's lid, the rough wood cold to the touch. Then, as though compelled by forces she didn't understand, she lifted the lid. The moment the chest opened, the house seemed to awaken. The walls trembled violently, and the whispers turned into piercing screams that surrounded her, filling the air with an unbearable sound. Inside the chest, there was no treasure, no forgotten relics, just an abyss of darkness, so deep it seemed to swallow the dim light of the basement. And within that void, a pair of hollow, unblinking eyes stared back at her. The darkness surged outward, and shadows poured from the chest, their twisting forms clawing at Lena. She screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The basement walls seemed to close in around her, the very house shifting and groaning, as if it were alive. And then silence. The whispers stopped. The house stilled, and Lena was gone. The next morning, the house stood quiet and still, as if nothing had happened. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting soft patterns on the dusty floors. From the outside, it looked just as it always had, old, worn, and unremarkable. But Lena was nowhere to be found. Her belongings remained untouched. Her car sat parked in the driveway. To the neighbors, it seemed as though she had simply vanished. Yet some began to notice peculiarities. At night, faint whispers could be heard from the house, carried on the still air. Shadows seemed to move behind the windows, even when no one was inside. The whispers grew louder over time, unsettling those who passed by. Stories spread of strange figures glimpsed through the curtains and lights flickering in the dead of night. And then, as suddenly as she had arrived, the house was back on the market. Its history was conveniently left untold, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and time. But not everything stayed hidden. Some say Lena still roams the halls, her voice among the whispers, warning the next unlucky soul who dares to call the house their own. Others believe the house has claimed her completely, feeding on her presence, just as it waits patiently for its next inhabitant. the house remains, standing tall on the edge of town, a silent reminder that some doors should never be opened. Have you ever encountered a place as chilling as this? Share your story in the comments. We want to hear your experiences with the unexplained. If you enjoyed this haunting tale, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us uncover more stories that will keep you up at night. And be sure to subscribe for more spine-tingling true horror tales. There's always another mystery waiting to be told. Next time, we'll take you deep into the mystery behind the sudden disappearance of a power plant worker. What happened that night might be even more disturbing than Lena's story. You won't want to miss it.